Matt, let's get started with what has happened to Scott Ritter. I know that you've talked with him on a show you've been doing together. And what's your take on what has happened?
Well, I think Scott pushed the boundaries of what the American empire is going to allow. And I think their assault on Scott, both their First and Fourth Amendment, so in the U.S., the First Amendment protects free speech, as well as the right of a free press, the right to read what you want, right, as well as say what you want, but also to the Fourth Amendment, they violated in Scott's case, in the sense that when Scott said, when the FBI agents interviewed him, they had all of his emails. They had all of his messages, right? So why they had to search his house and take his computer and everything, they already had everything that he had ever written, ever said. Any note he had put down was in the FBI's possession. And this is what's so crucial to understand of how suppression of speech works. It always goes hand in hand, not only in censorship, but also in surveillance and spying. But what Scott did was to be one of the most vocal and popular opponents of the American empire, not just in the U.S., but abroad. And the U.S., seeing that, knowing the decline it's in, seeing how badly things are going around them, as well as, two, realizing that this is the way things are heading. Not just the decline of the American empire, but the openness, the communication, this technology. We've talked about this a lot, right? This ability to do this, right? To inform people, to educate people, to organize people, to coordinate and cooperate with people. That is anathema to everything that a unipolar empire like the American, like the United States wants. And so Scott was high on the list, and they took a swing at him, not just to intimidate Scott, but I think to intimidate all of us. Not just you and I who are here talking, not others like, say, Ray McGovern or Larry Johnson or any of the host of other people who speak against the empire, against American wars, but also, too, even the people who are watching this, who are listening to this, people who consume this, right? Because you are being cataloged as well. You are being recorded as well. Because, again, if you're going to suppress free speech, you're not just suppressing what somebody is saying, you're also trying to destroy an ability to refute any possibility of reading what people want, of listening to what you want. So I think that, summarizes what we saw last week with the raid of the FBI on Scott Ritter's home, and the reasons why they did so. They did so because they were angry, right? How dare he do this? How dare he challenge us? But more importantly, they're afraid. And because they're afraid, we have to maintain our courage, maintain our resolve, be persistent in our actions, and not lose faith. But the reason why they are afraid is because the cracks in their foundation are not just real, but they're growing.
Matt, there are many people are talking about that Scott needs a lawyer to help him. Do you think what would be in favor of Scott to do? What would benefit him, in your opinion?
Well, Scott has a very open approach to all of this, in the sense of, I got nothing to hide. And that's how actually I am as well, too. I years ago, I was in Europe, and I met with some of the folks from WikiLeaks, and they taught me different cybersecurity methods, and I started using a VPN and encryption. And I've just come to the realization over these last several years that I'll do everything I can to protect myself from cyber hacking, from identity theft, those types of things. But if I'm worried about the American government, if I'm worried about the FBI or whoever, there's nothing I can do about that, except maybe put myself into such a condition where I'm so neurotic technology-wise that I don't get anything done. And I also tend to have the approach, as well as Scott does, of like, look, I'm an open book. What I say to you is what I'm saying to everybody else. Who I communicate with is clear. That's what Scott has been saying. That's what Scott has demonstrated his whole life. And of course, the FBI and the American government is trying to take advantage of that. So the danger with that type of open book approach is anything that you have, they're going to use against you. They're going to twist it. They're going to demean it. They're going to take it out of context. They're going to mistranslate it, whatever they need to do, because this is not a criminal assault on Scott. It's a political assault on Scott. Just as, behind me, Julian Assange. And I keep Julian's poster up. I've seen people in the comments say, hey, Matt, Julian's a free man. Time for the poster to come down. And, so just to address those, because I see those every time. The reason why it's still up and likely will stay up, but we'll see, is because it does two things. One, it reminds us that still Julian needs a pardon, just as Julian's family put out in a message today. The very real dangers of the U.S. government and other governments' assaults on journalism did not diminish. They actually increased because of Julian's plea deal. And the other thing, too, with having that poster behind me is to remind us of what we accomplished, what we did. It took us a long time, broke a lot of hearts along the way, but Julian was free. And we have to remember that we were able to do that. So in Scott's case, that's what Scott needs. He needs our support. He needs our resolve. In terms of whether or not Scott should have a lawyer, I don't know. I don't know what Scott's finances are like. I mean, this is part of the strategy of the American government, right? It's same as the U.S. empire's war strategy overseas is we're going to exhaust you with resources. When I was my first time in Iraq, this Army colonel who was like a mentor to me, he explained that to me very clearly, that the American way of war is to be able to waste more than your adversary. And the American victories, the ones that we can claim, the ones that we took part in, right? So the Civil War, as well as, say, whether it's the Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, we were just able to waste more than our adversary was. So that type of warfare extends to lawfare as well, which is what Scott's up against, this concept of lawfare. And this idea that, well, okay, Scott, you know what? We may never be able to convict you. We may never be able to put you in jail. We may never be able to shut you up, but we are going to exhaust you. We are going to make it so that your family is destitute, that everything you do is painful, and that this is such a burden on your life that maybe, we know it's not going to change your mind, Scott Ritter. It's going to make you miserable. It's going to miserate you, but maybe it will cause other people to have hesitation in terms of speaking out. And that just doesn't extend to individuals. That extends to institutions as well, whether it's anti-war groups, whether it's any type of advocacy or activist organization, or whether it's press outlets. This idea of like, do we want to say this because this might get us into trouble? So I see what the American government is doing with Scott as the natural follow-on to what it did with Julian Assange and what it will continue to do. And of course, we have to remember as well why Scott needs to be careful. Scott was a victim, as people know, with his legal history, the victim of entrapment before. And the American government, my God, at the federal, at the state, and the local level, our law enforcement agencies, they make their living off of entrapment. They really do. If people are familiar with the concept of civilian asset forfeiture, you know what I'm talking about. But it's a different thing not to get into. But so how Scott handles this, is entirely up to Scott. All I know is that I'll support him. I know you will, Nima, and that all the folks who are listening to this, who are believers in free speech, believers in a free press, believers in privacy, as well as understanding the reality of the American empire and the world it has made. I know you all are going to continue to support Scott as well.
Matt, getting to the conflict in Gaza, right now we're hearing that there are a lot of tensions within the Netanyahu administration between him and his party against his Ministry of Defense. Yeah. What's going on in your opinion?
I think Yoav Gallant, who is not just Netanyahu's Minister for Defense, but he's also his going to be his cohabitant in the dock at The Hague. If that could ever get through, because Yoav Gallant is also supposedly under indictment for war crimes with the International Criminal Court, and we're waiting on those arrest warrants, which I think all of us, our patience is running thin on that. I think what you have is you have all these tensions. You bound up this hurricane of religious, nationalist, militarist beliefs within the Netanyahu government, within this coalition government. It's abetted by a society that is just been conditioned to be psychopathic, whether it's from religious indoctrination, whether it's from national indoctrination, whether it's just from the mythology of their history, both modern and ancient. You see within the Israeli society a sickness. I don't know how other word to describe it than to be a militant culture, this deranged Sparta that exists, and that's how they see themselves, except in their own religious tones. So I think all the tension of trying to keep that together, and the fact that they've had no strategy. The strategy has been to keep the war going. I mean, of course, it's part of the larger strategy for Greater Israel. It's part of the larger Zionist program. And so, of course, when October 7th happens, you now have the opportunity to enact the genocide that you've always wanted. You've got this opportunity to enact the ethnic cleansing that you've desired for years in Gaza, right? As well as to clamp down on the West Bank, make conditions for its annexation, get the third Israeli-Lebanon war in 40 years, that you've been looking for. So all those things were given to them with the October 7th attacks. Just in the same way the American empire was given the gift of 9/11, if you will, to pursue its wars and to pursue its rampage. But there's no strategy. There is no, okay, this is what's going to occur next. And so what you have is this clash, if I can broadly, roughly define it, as I see it, between the security side and the religious side. So, but between the sides that you would paint with Bezalel Smotrich and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the other.
Ben-Gvir?
Yes, exactly, Ben-Gvir. Thank you. And then on the other side, you have those who come more from like that national security militarist side, and all of them have a crazy nationalist hue to them, of say Benny Gantz or even even Yair Lapid. I mean, there's no one in the Israeli political system outside of the Arab parties and a handful of Israeli parties that hold no power and don't look like they're going to gain any power anytime within this generation, that are offering anything other than war. It's just that what the aims are, what they want to pursue, what they want the end state to look like. And so you have that tension within the government between those who want to fully realize the potential, the opportunity they were given here to get Greater Israel, right? To take back Gaza as they see it and to recolonize it, and those who realize that that's going to be too much. That's going to be a massive headache. What we need to do is go back to the way it was. Just do it better, right? So just have a stronger fist with the Palestinians. But keep it into an occupation that's manageable. In that tension there, no one's saying stop the ethnic cleansing. No one's saying anything about a two-state solution. The whole Israeli government is against the two-state solution. That's clear. You saw a bill passed by the Knesset stating that. Netanyahu's cabinet is unanimous, including those who are on the far right, in no two-state solution. So it's just in terms of what does it look going forward, and that tension there. And then plus you have all the tensions that exist in a political society anyway. You have all the tensions that existed on October 6th. Netanyahu, for all his political success, a huge amount of Israelis hate him. And we have to remember that, go back a year, there were about almost hundreds of thousands, and some reports 1 million Israelis on the street demonstrating against Netanyahu government, calling for his arrest for corruption charges. Remember, Netanyahu's government was trying to push forward reforms that would just basically eviscerate the judiciary. So you have those tensions that also exist there. And then on top of that, you have this aspect of regional war. like, good God, tonight could be the attack where all our enemies launch on us. We haven't seen this in 50 years, right? This could be, right? I mean, in that sense. So all of that, plus other factors, with regards to Israel in terms of the displacement of roughly a couple 100,000 people still from the north and south of Israel. You have all the economic problems, which are massive. We could just talk about that for the rest of the hour, probably, just bleeding out of the Israeli economy. There's a report a couple of weeks ago, 40,000 Israeli businesses have shut down since October 7th. You've seen a massive flight of capital out of Israel, whether it's people not investing in Israel or the funds in Israel themselves saying, we got to put our money someplace other than home. We got to get it out of here. Tourism, of course, completely gone. Not completely gone, but you know what I'm talking about. So anyway, I mean, all those things. Yeah, I'm surprised these guys are still in a room with each other.
Yeah. Matt, do you think that at the end of the day, Iran going to attack Israel?
I think they have to. I think they have to. There's been too many statements from Iranian leadership. There's been too many attacks before that. A substantial population in Iran say weren't justly dealt with, that the Israelis weren't punished for. The conditions where you have an alignment where it's not just in Iran's interest. I think it's not in Iran's interest, don't get me wrong, but where you have those in Iran who believe that we have this alignment now with Yemen, our allies in Iraq and Syria, Hezbollah, and then, of course, Gaza. I'm sorry, of course, the Palestinians, that make it so that an attack now, we have numbers that we may not have at any other time. We also have the world's attention. And outside of the cruel and immoral and inhuman, corrupt American and Western European media, we have sympathy, right? So, you look at what, the political leadership in the West is saying, but then you look at against the rest of the world. So you had the leaders of France and Germany and Britain put out a statement today or yesterday about, calling for peace in the region. And then, of course, at the very end, they say, anything that happens, we're holding Iran responsible for, right? As if there's no context, no background, that Israel was just completely, an innocent, democratic nation just trying to provide for all of its people. And, like all that, so you see that. And the Iranians know that we have the world on our side on this. But that has to be weighed against, and this is why I'd advise against it. I understand their moral imperative, the pride that comes into this, the timing, but what this would unleash, what this could cause to unfold in terms of a regional war. We could be. It's become cliche and trite, but I'll say it anyway. That this reminds me and so many others, right, of the beginnings of the First World War. And we have to remember that the First World War didn't begin in August 1914. It didn't begin, in June when the Archduke was assassinated. I mean, it has its roots going decades back, including, in the years prior. You had a terrible war in the Balkans that killed hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions. I don't know. But there are all these things that led up. And so that's when you look at this and you look at what's possible and what we at this moment in time going forward, what we may be walking into, whether as witnesses, agents, participants in history, whether it occurs tonight, Nima, whether it occurs, next week or next year or 5 years from now. I think that the chances of a regional Middle East war are really great. And, I said this on my Substack last week. So we're sitting here and we're waiting for some type of Deus ex machina, some outside actor, someone to literally come down from the heavens to do something. And in this case, I'm not assigning any divinity to the Chinese, but I think the Chinese are the only ones who could bring about a diplomatic end to this horror show that is currently going on. And that could extend to a massive nightmare. I think it's got to come from the Chinese, in a sense of their ability to bang heads together, as a friend of mine said. That's what's needed. Yeah, I mean, this is, what we are potentially standing on the cusp of here is historic, to put it simply.
Yeah, Matt, if the Biden administration is honest in the way that they're talking about two-state solution and some sort of solution to the conflict, wouldn't be right now that opportunity to bring Israel into an agreement with Gazans and just make an agreement between Iran and Israelis in order to have a two-state solution. Iran not attacking Israel and Israel agreeing on have a two-state solution in Gaza. I don't know, something that the Biden administration can put some sort of pressure on the Netanyahu administration. Is that possible in your opinion?
No, it's not. It's not, and that's why I referenced the Chinese before. Of course, the answer to this is the Americans get the Israelis to stop their genocide. And that could be done in a number of ways, most especially by not sending them weapons, most especially by not providing them economic support, such through our loan guarantee program. There's a number of ways that we could put pressure on Israel and get them to stop, today. That's not going to happen. That, of course, would be the way you end this. That would not just end the genocide in Gaza, but it also would bring about a great easing of the regional tensions. Might not prevent a war because things are already set in motion, and these things sometimes have an inertia of their own. I mean, remind everyone, of course, that war is a superhuman force, but that would be the answer, of course. I mean, this is what gets said every time some American opens their mouth about Yemen, about the Houthis, Ansar Allah, on the Red Sea. The answer is simply an end to Israel's genocide, and we have in our power to do it, but they won't do it. It's politically advantageous for the Americans to continue their support of Israel. They will say and they will mouth and they will croak all types of things about two-state solution, about ceasefire, about protecting civilian lives. And as they say that, literally shoveling, throwing C-17s and cargo ships full of bombs and vehicles and spare parts and all the things that you need to make the genocide a reality to Israel on a daily basis. So, I mean, the it's not even hypocrisy. It's not even lying. I'm trying to think of a stronger word from this, but it is. What we're witnessing here is evil in the sense of this willingness to lie so easily, so arrogantly, sometimes so enthusiastically, to give cover for Israel to continue its genocide. There are all types of reasons why the United States should support, should change course. And you can even go into things like, look, this is what the Saudis originally wanted. You guys are so hard up, the Americans, you guys, this administration was so desirous of besting the Trump-Abraham Accords by getting the Saudis to normalize relations with Israel. This is the way you have to do it now. If you had been able to do it a year ago, but and so the Saudis are still, they're not top of the list for the Middle East, but among the non-white folks there, if you will, they're first in line. And we saw that this weekend when it was announced that the U.S. was going to resume selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, offensive weapons as they call them, essentially bombs and missiles and those types of things to kill civilians on the ground, as they did for 6, 7, 8 years in Yemen in a war that killed 400,000 people. So they're going to resume that. But the pathway to getting what you want politically for this White House to say we did a better job in the Middle East for peace reasons, because we brought the Saudis and Israelis together. And I've seen some things that talk about how corrupt it all is, how this is all about, Brett McGurk, who I knew Brett McGurk back in Iraq, 20 years ago. Brett McGurk making sure he gets his payday, just like a Jared Kushner did, when he left the White House after making all those deals with the UAE and with all the other nations that normalize with Israel and the Abraham Accords. So yeah, I mean, it's infuriating. This is sickening. You see things, I mean, that you just want to, the posturing that's going on, the lying that's going on, the statements about two-state solution and protecting civilians. Samantha Power, who wrote the book on 20 years ago on genocide and how the United States stood back from genocide, particularly in Rwanda, and how we need to do better. And now she's head of the U.S. Agency for International Development. I mean, she just put out just a statement that, it's the type of thing where you read what these people in power are saying, and they're just lying to you so willingly. They're lying to you that you understand so clearly based on your own emotions, but also too on the intellectual roadblock that you've run into. Like, what more can we do? These people are willing to lie like this. You understand why people choose political violence.
The other thing, Matt, right now would be the position of Turkey. They were just putting some sanctions on Israel, talking, and right now they said that they're gonna join South Africa in the case of genocide against Israel. But at the end of the day, to do something really important, you can cut that line of oil coming from Azerbaijan going through Turkey and then to Israel. What are they afraid of, in your opinion? Why they're not going after that plan?
They're afraid of losing too much money. There's certainly some of their sanctions. Israel's they've got a big trade between the two of them. They're afraid of losing too much money. They're afraid, of course, of angering the Americans. They are in a delicate position. They're balancing between NATO and between BRICS, right? I mean, they're really their geographic position really is illustrative of their political position right now, right? As that point in between two worlds, between two continents, if you will, what that they've had forever. Turkey, I think, I think the way the Turks look at this, and there's got to be a frustration there and this is what's really dangerous, right? Because when I say how, hey, maybe the regional war starts tonight, or maybe it starts in 5 years, why I would put more money on it starting later than now is because with two factors, Israel is able to do what it does. One, it's the support of the American empire, and the other is the support or the deterrence it has from its nuclear weapons. And so I think the Turks look at that and they can see the American empire is declining. They still can't put themselves out there too far on it. The Americans and the West essentially too strong. They've got a pretty good thing going right now, being in those two places at once, right? And they want to be a part of NATO because there is benefits to them from being part of NATO, and they're not prepared to leave that behind yet. Now, 5 or 10 years from now, as things change, as things progress, as nations develop, as the world outside of the American umbrella grows and strengthens, the Turks will have other options, right? And we don't want to discount at all the strength of the Turks right now. They have the largest army in NATO, I think, aside from the Americans. I think that's about right. And the Turks have a reputation as good war fighters. They have a militarist culture. Certainly Erdogan, everyone knows him. This idea that you don't think at night sometimes Erdogan is thinking, I could be the next Salah ad-Din, but the timing's not right. But the frustration right now for them not to be able to put, say, their F-16s over Beirut and say, Israel's not coming here, right? And we're seeing this rapprochement, right? Maybe I haven't seen anything in the last couple of days. Maybe it all blew up, but, this rapprochement between Syria and Turkey, between Assad and Erdogan, right? How far is it to think that, Turks would say, hey, Erdogan can call Assad, I'm marching 100,000 troops through your coastal region. They're not stopping. They're going down to Lebanon, like that type of thing. You take away, you give an alternative to the American empire, and you also take away that nuclear parity, that becomes a real possibility. And so this is something many people have been saying for a while, but especially in the last 10 months, that why doesn't this genocide cause Arab nations or the Turks or whoever to get nuclear weapons? And the Pakistanis have said, we'll give the Turks nuclear weapons. I mean, so it's there. And so if you're the Turks, why wouldn't you get nuclear weapons? I mean, looking at how you're fundamentally in your own region, right? A region that you once controlled, all the history, which matters to all these people, of course, but also too in the modern, like in the moment now, in your region, you are unable to act fully in your interests in the way that your people demand because of Israel's nuclear deterrent. Why wouldn't you upset that? Why wouldn't you get your own nukes? And so I mean, this what the Turks will do. I don't think we're going to see much. I mean, Erdogan said, we went into Libya, we went into Nagorno-Karabakh, and I think what he means by that is you're going to see Turkish drones, if they're not already in the hands of Hezbollah, you're going to see them. You're going to see other Turkish weapon systems, as well as maybe Turkish support in other ways. But I don't think you're going to see Turkish infantry in southern Lebanon. There's a lot of history with that too, of course, right? So I remember being in Iraq in 2004, and up near Kirkuk, and the Turks were there, and they weren't supposed to be there, and they had a little compound, and they had their flag flying over it. And it's just like, nobody here, if there's one thing that's going to unite the Kurds and the Arabs, it's that flag over that building, and it wasn't up there that much longer, I think. But I mean, this is all, this would be wonderful to discuss. It's so enjoyable, right? Fantastic if we were dealing with a novel or if we were reviewing history. But the fact that this is what is coming to us and what that portends and what that extends to all of us, it means for us. Yeah, I mean, the weight of this, the weight doesn't sit in our minds and our hearts and our stomach. It's not like a stone. It's more like a dump truck weighing on us of what's going to occur here. And then we see what my people are doing. You're in Brazil, so we've got, but my people are doing and making this regional war a reality. And the last thing I'll say on this, I know I've gone on for quite a while, but the last thing I'll say is that what frightens me, what makes this idea of a regional war possible now, I know I just said that I don't think it'll be for a while, but the idea for Israel, though, what benefits Israel right now is the U.S. political situation. You just had Netanyahu come to Congress. Most of the Congress knelt and kissed his ring. Of the Democrats who didn't show up, the 100 Democrats who didn't show up, what would you say? About 75 of them are still going to vote for Israel to get weapons. So what's the big deal about that? And then, you've got, to put it politely, a lame duck president. And then you've got two major political candidates who are just who'll do everything they can to keep themselves in the graces of the Israel lobby. Right. And so, the political moment in the U.S., this paralysis, this ability for Israel to do what it wants, for the Israelis in terms of contemplating, okay, do we want to do something in Lebanon? Do we want to do a preemptive strike on Iran? We, just like 10 months ago in Gaza, we're never going to get a better situation, a better time than now. Well, this may be the case because of the American political circumstances.
Yeah, the other thing, Matt, right now, it seems that in Israel, they were talking about raping prisoners. And in your opinion, when a society comes to a point in which a majority of the society supports genocide in Gaza, and right now in that poll that the Channel 12 conducted, the majority of people were in favor of raping prisoners. Right. How can a society come to a point that all the bad things that they were talking about, Palestinians or raping or beheading the people or everything, they were putting the blame on Gaza and Palestinians, they're doing right now, and they've been doing during this conflict in Gaza?
Oh, and they've been doing it for 70 years as a state, longer in terms of their attempt to ethnically cleanse and displace the Palestinians and, conquer. Um, yeah, I mean, you had a poll back in March, I think it was, that found almost 70% of Israelis were supportive of the starvation of the Palestinian people in Gaza, right? So, I mean, you see this over and over again, this not just acceptance or just complacency, but this desire for these criminal and savage and barbaric acts. And this is why what we say about Israel, about its people, its leadership, its actions is not anti-Semitic, because this is historical. This shows that the Israelis, that the Israeli Jews, that are human just as all of us, because what they are doing is essentially a human action. I mean, look throughout our history as a species, what we have done to one another. I think this is the point of why you started this channel, Nima, this idea of dialogue works, because this is where people get to. And so when you have a society like Israel that for generations has been conditioned, brainwashed, maybe might be the better term, but has been put in a place through its education, through its media, through all its forms of self-awareness, everything it tells itself about itself, all its children who grow up are given this story, this narrative, this concept of Israel as a Sparta, right? As God's chosen people against the world, of all these stories that go back thousands of years. That's how you get to a point where people can say, yes, we can rape prisoners. Yes, it's our right to do so. I mean, there's also some nut job stuff in the Talmud, I guess, that says it's okay too. But I've got a feeling that that's just like, any other religious text. If you're crazy enough or sick enough, you can find whatever you want in it. But the idea of how does a society get like this sickness, this madness, this savagery, it's because there has been decades, generations of it being reinforced, of a story being told among its own people of this is who we are and this is who is against us. And I think, you don't see a revulsion in Israel outside of the single digits. The number of young Israeli men and women, brave those few are minuscule, who are not going into service. Those who are saying they're not going to go back to the reserves, or, it's for reasons, I believe, other than taking part in such an immoral, horrific, and criminal act as this genocide. Then don't get me wrong. I know there are some Israelis who are speaking out about that. They are, absolutely. But when you look at in the aggregate, you look in the totals, you see just this willingness, even among those who are not in favor of the right to rape Palestinians. You still have many, many among those who believe in the right to destroy their civilization, to destroy them as a people, and to chase them away. I mean, the percentage of Israelis who believe the genocide should be stopped, and they won't call it genocide, they'll call it a war, they'll call it self-defense, whatever. Numbers in the single digits, percentage-wise. So it's a great question to ask, and it's something that we have to be cognizant of. This is a human story. This is very real. You can ask this about any other genocide, about any other type of organized murder of a people that has occurred throughout our history. It's going to have the same contours. I mean, you go and you look, I brought Rwanda before, the violence that occurred there, the dehumanizing. And I think that's what's so key. And when you do that for generations, when that is the foundation of how people view the world and they don't get anything else, that's what I've been kind of so amazed by some of the Israeli media, Nima, is that most of what we know about the atrocities that Israel is committing is coming from Israeli media. And maybe that's because that's their external English language based media. But certainly, but if you listen to what people like Gideon Levy, the columnist at Haaretz, very outspoken against not just crime of Israel, but Israel's ongoing crimes. He says that the Israeli media provides the energy for this. It provides the fuel for this. It's giving people what they want. So I guess we're not seeing the Hebrew language Israeli media that is feeding this and has been feeding it for decades. But, when you have this type of system put in place and it benefits in so many ways, and you have not just your own internal, but an external. I mean, the role of, say, America's Hollywood in all this, the role of the American media in all this. I mean, up until I went to college, and American Jews who I went to college with dissuaded me of my opinion of Israel. I bought into the whole storyline. Well, my knowledge of Israel came from reading Leon Uris and Herman Wouk and James Michener, right? These glorified romantic histories. In fact, one of Herman Wouk's novels about the foundation of Israel is called The Glory. I believe that story. And then luckily I had some friends who were, American Jews who had been to Israel and, whose families were very not in line with Zionism. And they dissuaded me of that. And that allowed me to think clearly over these years about what's been occurring there. But even still, for me, it wasn't until probably, I would say, 15, 16 years ago that I really had an understanding of what was occurring there. Yeah. And I'm 51, just for people's reference.
Matt, getting to the conflict in Ukraine, what's your understanding on what's going on in the Kursk region? Lindsey Graham just calling this operation as is brave, brilliant, just beautiful. And
well, yeah, of course, and Richard Blumenthal, who is a Democratic counterpart on Ukraine to Lindsey Graham, those two, of course they're there. Let me just say that. Of course they're there. Reflecting on this, Nima, objectively, and I think like everybody else, a week ago when I heard the news, it was okay. It's just a raid, just like they did in Belgorod, and okay, whatever. And then I wasn't able to pay attention to the news for a couple of days, and I saw something maybe Thursday or Friday, and holy cow, they're still there. So objectively, with the caveats of the risk in all of this, right? And one of the things we come to is we don't have a good understanding of what the actual order of battle is here. We don't have I've been saying this for a couple of years now. Somebody show me the order of battle for both sides. When I say order of battle, I mean the units, their strengths, how they are laid out, geographic disposition, to give you an idea, basically like a roster. You start a game, whether it's football or baseball, you see the opening lineups, like, okay, what's the current situation here? And even when we saw a year and a half ago, when that young Massachusetts Air Guardman released the Discord leaks, he released the briefing papers for the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, you could see in the footnotes that the Americans, the guys who were briefing, the men and women who were briefing Milley, they had no degree of certainty in anything about order of battle. You could see that in their footnotes. We don't trust this. We're getting this information from the Ukrainians. It's not reliable. So we really don't have a good idea of what Ukraine's reserves look like. We can speculate based upon the casualties we assume that they are taking, about their needs for mobilization, other things, just as we do with Russia. And we don't have a good idea about Russia's reserves either. You've heard they've had 300,000, 350,000 men in reserve. Maybe it's taken a while to get over there. All I'm saying is caveat all of that, caveat the risks to Ukraine, that objectively, I think this was a smart move on Ukraine's part. It's not going to fundamentally alter the war at all. This war is stalemated. Neither side, when I say stalemated, what I mean is neither side can throw a punch that's going to knock the other side out, right? The war can't be militarily won in the moment or in the foreseeable future. I'm not talking 3 or 4 years from now. I'm talking in the next 6 months, 1 year time frame. Things can happen, of course, and change all that. But this doesn't change that stalemate. This is not going to, unlike the people on CNN and MSNBC who were talking about this, who are wetting their pants over this. This is not going to cause Russia's collapse. But what it does do is, I think, a couple of different things. One, it's a huge morale booster for the Ukrainians. It shows that they're able to operate, and it shows that they're able to think in a manner that we haven't seen before. I mean, we've all been so rightly disdainful of the Ukrainian military leadership. You know, I mean, good God, that offensive they lost last year, that will be infamous in terms of what they did, how bad it was, how horrific it was, just how stupid it was. This, on the other hand, again, caveating it with the huge risk, limited 5 brigades, maybe we're hearing. They've taken a portion of Russia, 150 square miles, which is like the size of a mid-size American city. They've forced a couple 100,000 Russians to evacuate. It's such a morale boost for the Ukrainians, I think, both in the military and both their civilians. It also allows them to say to their external supporters, and this is why Blumenthal and Graham are there, don't give up on us. Look, we can still pack a punch. We can still do things. We're still in this. I think, you get back this idea of the levels of war, tactical, operational, strategic, and political. Political is on top. This has no real operational significance, I don't think. Strategic significance, possibly in a couple areas. Politically is where it matters. It matters politically inside Ukraine. It matters politically to the West. Now all these cheerleaders for the war can say, look, you can't count them out. We need to give them more money. They're still in it, even though, again, it doesn't fundamentally change the war at all in the sense of changing it from a stalemate. And then in Russia, and here's the big thing. This is why I think it was smart. You have Ukrainians talking about negotiations now. Some of that, I think, is because they realize a Trump presidency is likely. I know Harris is doing better in the polls, but I think, if I got to put money, I'm going to put it on Trump. God help us, but I'll put money on Trump, and, that might change. I mean, he's going to, whatever. But in terms of the Ukrainians looking at this, I think they have to hedge for that. And so that's why they're willing possibly to start negotiating, because they much rather have a deal that they can negotiate on than to accept whatever deal is given to them if Trump comes into office, right? So I think that's the way that their outlook is. This is how they're perceiving it, that we've got to go into negotiations. Now, for Russia, Russia cannot lose any inch of land to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians, for 8 years, had lost Crimea. They were upset about it. They were unhappy about it, but it wasn't, it wasn't going to, they were able to live with it to a degree, right? You have more and more tranches of Ukrainians saying, we're willing to give up land for peace. I think there was a poll a month or two ago that number was like upwards of almost 40% of Ukrainians who said that they're willing to trade land for peace. And that number is growing. Right. So you have within the Ukrainians an ability to give up land, possibly. OK, they're not going to say it out loud, but I think that they're willing to do it. For the Russians, absolutely no way. There is no way the Russian government can lose any land. So if you're the Ukrainians and you look like you're going into negotiations and you have an opportunity to take, what amounts to a small sized American city, 150 square miles, but you're able to hold it and you go into negotiations with that. And maybe it causes you to lose parts of your line. Remember, you still have this 1,000-kilometer front line to the east of where all this is going in Kursk. So say you pulled those brigades, you've lost some of your reserves, right? The Russians are able to advance. Well, you're banking on one. The Russians don't want to advance too far. I've talked about this before. This is my estimation. The Russians don't want to advance too far west because then they get into, to put it simply, Ukrainian-speaking territory more than they're in Russian-speaking territory. It's a hostile population, dangers of insurgency. This is what the West wanted to happen, right? Go back 2.5 years. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton cackling about how we can do to them now what we did to them in Afghanistan, So you have that there. So the Russians, how far west would the Russians even want to advance? How far west are they able to advance? Do they have the wherewithal to do it? I've been bearish on that. I know other guys, have not been, but I have been, and I still maybe proved wrong. So if you have this understanding that if we can seize this Russian land, if we can hold it, and this is terrible for the Russians. This is just politically unacceptable. This cannot, one, does that cause the Russians to commit so much up there that maybe we could actually retake some in the east? Or more likely, this is what I think, is that the Ukrainians are willing to give more land in the east. Look, we're allowed the Russians to push themselves closer to the river, right? We'll allow them to extend themselves westward as long as we hold this part of Russia, because this is such a huge political victory for us. So that's the way I look at it, is that it may have been a smart move for Ukraine. I mean, I can get off this call with you, Nima, and find out that they've completely collapsed and all those Ukrainians have been killed. Ukrainians have done so many stupid things, dumb things. They had that beachhead this year on the eastern side of the river, where they just lost thousands of casualties, holding this remarkably insipid, to try and use a word different than stupid, insipid beachhead on the far side of the bank on the far side of the river for them. So they do stuff like that. You also see their recklessness. I mean, certainly you had the reports this weekend of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant getting hit by a drone. The Ukrainians said that the Russians started the fire, but they blew it up themselves or whatever. I believe that about as much as I believe the Russians blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, or that, to be even more glib, that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. It just makes no sense, right? So you have this reckless nature of the Ukrainians attack. So now they seize this land. They launch a drone strike on a nuclear power plant. Let's remember, how many times have they attacked Russia's nuclear warning systems, right? Their nuclear warning radars. They've launched drone attacks on the Kremlin. They're willing to do whatever they can. They've launched assassinations all over the place. So they're willing to do what they can to try and cause some type of terror within Russian society, as well as just to, they've got this fantasy, these special ops guys, these intel guys, about starting some type of systemic collapse by just the right pinprick, right? It's going to bring the whole thing down, but and let's not forget too, you also had the attack on Moscow and the concert hall back in March, right? Which I certainly believe the Ukrainians were involved in that. So you have all that coupled with them holding territory, and now this talk of negotiations. Now this completely could backfire. One, it could cause not pulling those troops to the north, as everyone is saying, could cause a collapse somewhere else on your line. It could cause the Russians to open up now a sustained front up there in the north where you didn't have one before. Maybe the Russians have enough manpower to start a sustained front up there now, and now they push into Ukraine from there. And now, great, your front's even larger, right? Which was, I think, the stupidity in the Belgorod raids, is that allowed for the Russians to open up that, extend the front even further. But the other side of this too, though, is that, again, it's the political we're talking about. We have to keep Putin, with regards to this war, is a moderate centrist, if you will, and to use like Western phrasing for it. Most of his political pressure comes from those who feel he's not being harsh enough in Ukraine, who feel that he's not fighting hard enough, that they really need to hammer Ukraine further. Why are these cities in Ukraine still standing? Why aren't we taking the Israeli method to them? Right? Why doesn't Kyiv look like Khan Yunis right now? That's the type of people that Putin is dealing with. And so does this type of push into Russia, and if they're able to hold the terrain, does that then mean that Putin doesn't respond to that through negotiations? He responds to it by listening to those who are pushing him, and really starts to land some real awful hammer blows on Ukraine. Because I think most of us who are objective, or try to be objective, will say, okay, like on the dial here, Russia's war has been about a 5, maybe a 6 at times, but a 5. And does he now crank it up to 7 or 8? As a result of this, not because this Ukrainian holding of territory means anything. It's insignificant. except for politically. This is not going to collapse the Russian government. You know, it's going to cause some discontent, some embarrassment. It's going to frustrate their plans, whatever they were planning to do next several months. This has upended it, on and on and on. But again, it doesn't fundamentally change the status quo of the war. But, you know, does this mean, though, that he has to respond in a way that allows him to answer his critics who want him to do more? So remember that, you know, unlike what many American commentators said about Prigozhin's Wagner mutiny last year, it wasn't as if Prigozhin believed that, you know, I'm going to say that they got it wrong. They misunderstand it, right? Prigozhin wanted the war to be fought harder, not ended. And will this mean the same thing? Is this a gambit, a chance that might backfire on Ukraine? So, I mean, the only thing to do is to sit and watch, you know, speak out as we can about the insanity of this, the need for a ceasefire in Ukraine, a need for negotiations, the fear that this will escalate, point to things like, look what just happened at Zaporizhzhia. Look what they're doing. Look how dangerous this is, as well as in the greater fears of escalation, whether it be horizontal or whether it be, you know, vertical. You know, I mean, you don't have to like think too hard to think about, well, okay, maybe Belarus says, you know, we're coming in to help the Russians. And that excites the Poles and the Baltics, right? And that gets them to do things that lead to, right? I mean, it's not too hard to think about how this path we're on, how it could get worse than it is. And it's really, really bad now. I mean, this is the worst we have been in since, you know, as people say, 70 years since the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Matt, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Hey, thank you, Nima. I appreciate it, man.